It started with a headline I never imagined would carry my name. Miami couple sues daughter over $3.4 million estate. The daughter was me. My name is Isabel Crane, 35 years old, a financial investigator based in Savannah, Georgia. For years, I've spent my life tracing lies, corporate frauds, hidden accounts, people who built empires on deceit. I believed I'd seen every kind of betrayal, but nothing prepares you for the moment when your own parents sue you in court. The same people who abandoned me when I was barely 5 months old were now demanding the inheritance left by the man who had raised me, my grandfather, Judge Harold Whitmore. If you've ever felt betrayed by the ones who should have protected you, you'll understand this story. Before we go deeper, tell me in the comments, what would you do if the parents who left you came back for money? And if you believe in truth, justice, and stories that remind us what real family means, make sure to subscribe, because this one will stay with you long after it ends. The notice arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning, a thick cream envelope with my name written in formal black ink. For a second, my chest tightened. My grandfather used the same stationery for his letters when I was away at college, but when I saw the sender's name, Laura and Dennis Crane, the warmth drained from my body. Inside was a summons accusing me of manipulating my grandfather's will. Undue influence and fraudulent control. Words that cut deeper than any courtroom verdict. I sat frozen, my hands trembling around the papers. They hadn't shown up for my birthdays, my graduations, not even the day I buried the only man who ever acted like a father to me. Yet now, they were showing up for his money. That night, I wandered into my grandmother Evelyn's old garden, where the hibiscus she planted decades ago still bloomed a fierce, impossible red. She used to say, "Some roots grow stronger when they're tested by storms." Back then, I thought she was talking about plants. Now, I know she meant people. Tomorrow, I'd walk into a courtroom not as an investigator, but as a daughter accused of betraying the man who saved her. And in that moment, I remembered my grandfather's words from the first day I started working for him. Justice isn't about blood, Isabel. It's about truth. So as the courtroom doors opened, and my parents entered for the first time in 3 decades, I felt my pulse steady. This wasn't just a legal case. It was the reckoning of a lifetime, a test of whether love that stayed could finally stand against the blood that left. The morning of the hearing arrived heavy with humidity, that kind of southern stillness before a storm. The courthouse loomed ahead, white columns gleaming under the Savannah sun. I'd walked through these doors hundreds of times for work, but this time my steps felt foreign, hesitant. Amelia Hart, my attorney and mentor, walked beside me. She was in her 50s, graceful but firm, the kind of woman whose silence carried more authority than most men's speeches. "You ready, Isabel?" she asked softly as we climbed the marble steps. "As ready as anyone walking into their own family's funeral," I murmured. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polish and nerves. My parents sat at the plaintiff's table, Laura, still elegant in a pale coral suit, and Dennis with his silver hair slicked back and his tie knotted too tight. It was the first time I'd seen them in 30 years, and yet nothing about them felt unfamiliar. The same poised faces that once turned away from a crying infant now turned toward a $3.4 million estate. They didn't look at me, not once. When Judge Avery took the bench, my pulse steadied. Amelia leaned closer. "Remember," she whispered, "truth doesn't need to shout." The opposing attorney, Richard Dale, rose first. His voice was smooth, rehearsed, a man well-trained in emotional theater. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is simple. The defendant, Miss Crane, manipulated her aging grandfather into rewriting his will, excluding his only living child, her mother, and redirecting a substantial estate in her own favor. His words sliced through the room like paper cuts, small but sharp. I kept my gaze forward, repeating the breathing exercise my grandfather had taught me. In, hold, out. Then Amelia stood, her presence calm yet commanding. "Your Honor," she said. her accent carrying the soft drawl of Georgia and the weight of experience. The plaintiffs abandoned my client when she was an infant. They left her in the care of Judge Whitmore and his wife Evelyn, who raised her with love, education, and stability for over 3 decades. This case isn't about manipulation. It's about recognition, about who showed up. The word showed lingered in the air. Even the judge's pen paused. Amelia continued, laying a folder on the table. We'll present financial records showing that Judge Whitmore supported the plaintiffs for 22 years. Monthly payments, totaling over $800,000, will show calendars, letters, and journals documenting missed visits and unreturned calls, and will show 30 years of photographs where the plaintiffs are missing from every frame. The silence that followed was louder than any argument. My mother's coral lipstick stiffened into a line. My father adjusted his cufflinks but said nothing. I looked down at my hands, steady, unmoving. I remembered the countless Sundays spent in my grandparents' kitchen, folding lemon zest into batter, listening to my grandfather's voice echo through the house as he read from his law journals. They stayed. They chose me. When the recess bell rang, Amelia turned to me. They'll play the sympathy card next, she warned. Tears, regret, the whole act. Don't let it shake you, I smiled faintly. I've lived 30 years without their love. Their performance can't hurt me now. But as I stepped outside into the courtyard, the truth stung sharper than I expected. Seeing them again, hearing them claim the word family after decades of silence, reopened a wound I thought had healed. The hibiscus in the courthouse garden swayed gently in the heat, red petals shimmering against the stone walls. I reached out, touching one soft bloom. Grandma once said, "You can't stop a storm, Isabel, but you can choose how you stand in the rain." And that's exactly what I planned to do, stand tall, unshaken, until the truth bloomed again. When the court reconvened after recess, the atmosphere had shifted. The spectators, colleagues, local journalists, even a few of my grandfather's old associates, leaned forward, sensing drama. I straightened my blazer and forced my pulse into rhythm. This was no longer just a legal proceeding. It was a performance, and my parents had rehearsed for months. Mother was the first to take the stand. Laura Crane looked immaculate, as always, hair swept back, pearls gleaming, voice trembling with carefully crafted sorrow. "I loved my father," she began softly, her eyes glistening just enough to catch the judge's attention. But in his final years, he grew confused. Isabel was always there, whispering in his ear, keeping us apart. Her attorney, Dale, nodded along like a conductor guiding a soloist. "And did you ever feel manipulated, Mrs. Crane?" She sighed dramatically. "Constantly. My father used to say Isabel reminded him of me when I was young. I think she took advantage of that sentimentality. Each word landed with precision. Calculated, polished, false." I felt the air around me thicken. Amelia leaned forward, pen tapping once against her notepad. When she rose for cross-examination, her calm voice carried through the courtroom like the slow roll of thunder. "Mrs. Crane," Amelia began, "how many times did you visit your father between 1990 and 2020? Mother blinked. I don't recall exactly." "Would 10 visits sound right?" "Perhaps more." Amelia handed the judge a folder. "We have phone logs and journals from Judge Whitmore's household. 10 visits. In 30 years. And in those same 30 years, do you know how many birthdays, holidays, or graduations you attended for your daughter?" My mother's voice faltered. "That's irrelevant to this case." "I think it's entirely relevant," Amelia said. "Because this case isn't about inheritance. It's about presence. About who was there." The tension cracked the air. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. My mother's hands clenched in her lap, knuckles whitening. For a moment the mask slipped, revealing something colder than grief, resentment. When Amelia displayed a page from my grandmother's journal, I could barely breathe. In the neat, slanted handwriting I knew so well were the words, December 22nd, 1998, Laura promised to visit for Christmas. Isabel asked again why her mother doesn't come. I told her sometimes love takes longer to arrive. Fourth Christmas she's missed. Mother looked away. Amelia's voice softened, almost kind. Mrs. Crane, would you like to know what your father wrote 2 weeks before he died? She held up a handwritten letter, the ink faint but steady. I leave everything to Isabel, not out of anger but gratitude. She stayed. When others left, she remained my family in every way that matters. My mother's breath hitched. Her face hardened into marble. That was the moment the betrayal cut both ways. They had betrayed me long ago, but now, under oath, and in front of the world, I betrayed their illusion. The picture-perfect family they pretended to be shattered under the weight of truth. When it was my father's turn, he avoided my eyes. Dennis Crane looked uncomfortable, tugging at his cufflinks as if they were chains. Mr. Crane, Amelia asked evenly, did you attend your daughter's graduation? He hesitated. Which one? The courtroom chuckled quietly. Amelia didn't smile. Any of them. I was traveling for work. She paused, then asked, where did your daughter attend college? He opened his mouth and stopped. His silence was louder than any confession. That's when I felt it, the sting of recognition that this wasn't hatred, it was indifference. My parents didn't hate me, they simply never saw me at all. As the day ended, Judge Avery called for adjournment. My parents hurried past me without a glance. For 30 years I'd imagined what I'd say if I ever saw them again. Questions, accusations, maybe even forgiveness. But now that moment had come, and I had no words left. Outside, the late afternoon sun poured gold over the courthouse steps. I sat alone on the stone bench, the sound of cicadas rising in the heat. Amelia joined me, handing me a bottle of water. You did well, she said quietly. You stayed calm. That's strength. I looked out toward the garden where hibiscus flowers swayed in the breeze, their red petals catching the fading light. Strength, I whispered. That's what Grandma called love after it learns how to survive. For the first time that day, I smiled. Small, but real. Because even as betrayal filled the courtroom, something inside me had begun to shift. I wasn't just defending an inheritance anymore. I was defending the truth of a lifetime, the proof that love doesn't leave. The next morning, the courthouse felt different, sharper somehow, as if everyone could sense the tension waiting to unfold. The marble floors gleamed beneath my heels, each step echoing like a countdown. I could feel eyes following me, reporters, townspeople, former colleagues, all waiting to see if the abandoned daughter would finally break. But I didn't come here to break. I came here to stand. Inside the courtroom, my parents whispered frantically with their attorney. Mother's mask of grace was cracking, her coral lipstick smudged around the edges. Father looked even worse, a hollow shell of the man who once prided himself on control. Judge Avery entered, gavel in hand. Court is now in session. Amelia leaned close and whispered, they're calling a surprise witness. Don't react. Sure enough, Dale rose dramatically. Your Honor, the plaintiffs would like to call Dr. Thomas Barrett, a physician who treated the late Judge Harold Whitmore during his final months. A murmur spread through the courtroom. I frowned. Grandfather's primary doctor had been Dr. Simmons for decades. This name I didn't recognize. The man who took the stand looked nervous, adjusting his glasses repeatedly. Dr. Barrett, Dale said smoothly, please describe Judge Whitmore's condition near the end of his life. He seemed forgetful, Barrett began, glancing toward my mother for reassurance. At times confused about his finances. He mentioned pressure to make certain changes to his will. Mother dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief embroidered with her initials, the same one she had used yesterday. My chest tightened. Lies. Every word of it. Amelia rose slowly, her calm composure slicing cleaner than any objection. Dr. Barrett, you say you treated Judge Whitmore in his final months? Yes. How many times? Twice. And when exactly did you open your practice here in Savannah? He hesitated. 8 months before his passing. And who's your business partner? He blinked. Dr. Patrick Crane. Crane, as in Laura Crane's cousin? The courtroom gasped. My mother's posture stiffened. Her hand froze mid-dab. Amelia nodded once. Interesting connection. Now, doctor, could you read the last line of this certified medical report from Judge Whitmore's actual physician of 30 years, Dr. Harold Simmons? Barrett swallowed hard, eyes flicking down the page Amelia handed him. Cognitive function remains excellent. No evidence of confusion or impairment in decision-making. Thank you, Amelia said, turning toward the bench. Your Honor, I submit Exhibit 47, medical confirmation that Judge Whitmore was fully competent when he signed his will. The judge nodded. Accepted. Barrett's testimony unraveled before our eyes. Dale tried to recover, but the damage was done. Every answer only deepened the cracks. My mother's face hardened, fury replacing fragility. She leaned toward her lawyer, whispering fiercely, "End this now." But Amelia wasn't finished. "One more question, doctor," she said softly. "Who suggested that Judge Whitmore might need sedatives?" Barrett hesitated, voice trembling. "Mrs. Crane did." The silence that followed felt eternal. Then Judge Avery spoke, tone firm. "That will be all. The witness is excused." As Barrett stepped down, my father muttered something to my mother. Her expression twisted, part panic, part rage. The perfect facade she'd built for 30 years was crumbling under the weight of truth. When my turn to testify came, my pulse steadied. Amelia's hand brushed mine as I rose. "You've been preparing for this moment your whole life," she whispered. "Not in law, in grace." The bailiff swore me in. I adjusted the collar of my jacket, remembering my grandmother pressing it for me the morning I defended my first major case. "Stand tall, even when your heart trembles," she had said. Amelia began gently. "Miss Crane, did your grandfather ever discuss his will with you?" "Yes," I replied, meeting the judge's gaze. "He believed in transparency. He wanted me to understand his decisions, and what did he say? That he and my grandmother had decided to leave everything to me, not out of favoritism, but out of gratitude. He said I'd given them back their faith in family. And did you ever ask him to change it?" "Never. He was the most stubborn man I've ever known. No one could influence Judge Harold Whitmore." A faint smile tugged at the corners of Judge Avery's mouth. Dale stood for cross-examination, his tone clipped. "Miss Crane, you were aware of the will, correct?" "Yes." "And you spent every Sunday at his house?" "Yes." "So you had ample opportunity to pressure him." I met his eyes steadily. "I also had 30 years of opportunity to ask my parents why they left, but I didn't. Some silences speak for themselves, Mr. Dale." The gallery stirred. Someone in the back murmured, "Good for her." Dale's confidence faltered. He shifted to another topic, fumbling through his notes. "You baked with your grandmother often, didn't you?" I blinked. "Yes, every Saturday." "What does that have to do with this case?" He smirked. "You seem sentimental, Miss Crane." "Perhaps overly so. Isn't it possible you romanticized your relationship with your grandparents?" The question stung, but I smiled softly. If loving the people who raised me is a flaw, then yes, I'm guilty. Laughter rippled gently through the courtroom. Even the judge hid a faint grin behind his glasses. When my testimony ended, Amelia squeezed my shoulder. "You did beautifully." But as I sat back down, exhaustion settled deep in my bones. My parents' faces were unreadable. For a moment, I caught my father's eyes. There was something there. A flicker of regret, maybe, but then it was gone. Outside, during recess, Amelia and I stood by the courthouse garden. The hibiscus swayed again, red against the pale sky. "He's gone, you know," I said quietly. "Grandfather, but sometimes I swear I can still hear him, Every time I fight for what's right." Amelia smiled. "Then keep listening." The bell rang. Time to return inside. I took one last look at the flowers before turning toward the doors. The storm had begun. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the thunder. Because truth, the kind my grandfather believed in, was finally finding its voice. By the time the final day of trial arrived, the air inside the courthouse felt heavy, like the moment before a summer storm breaks open. The benches were filled with spectators, local reporters, law students, even the pastor from my grandparents' old church. Everyone had come to witness the end of what they called the Whitmore family war. My parents sat side by side at the plaintiff's table, but there was distance in the way they leaned away from each other. Their unity had cracked, replaced by quiet blame. Father stared straight ahead. Mother tapped her manicured nails against the table, pretending calm. Judge Avery adjusted his glasses. "Closing arguments," he announced. Dale rose, his tone desperate but still rehearsed. "Your Honor, this case is not about greed. It is about family, about a mother's right to her father's legacy, about blood." He turned toward the gallery, searching for sympathy. "We've all made mistakes. Mrs. Crane may have missed some years, but should that cost her everything? Blood should matter. Tradition should matter." I felt the words scrape across the room like sandpaper, hollow, smooth, and false. For the first time, I didn't feel anger, only clarity. Then Amelia stood. She didn't carry stacks of documents this time, only a single letter folded in her hand. Her voice, when it came, was soft but unshakable. "Your Honor, this case has never been about blood. It's about presence." The courtroom went still. Amelia unfolded the paper carefully. "This is a letter written by Judge Harold Whitmore 2 weeks before his passing. With your permission, I'll read it." The judge nodded. She began. "Isabel, you inherit not because of blood, but because you stayed. When Evelyn passed, you never missed a Sunday. When I grew tired, you brought your work here just to keep me company. Laura and Dennis will always be my children, but you were the one who showed me what family truly means. You stayed when others walked away." The words trembled in the air, landing like rain after a long drought. My throat burned, but I kept my eyes forward. Amelia looked up. "Your Honor, evidence, not emotion, must guide this court. And the evidence is clear. 30 years of abandonment, a lifetime of love and care, and a letter written in full mind and heart. Justice in this case is not punishment, it's acknowledgement." For a long moment there was silence. Then Judge Avery leaned forward. "Having reviewed all testimony and evidence presented, this court finds the will of Judge Harold Whitmore valid and executed with sound mind. The plaintiff's claims are dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, the plaintiffs will pay the defendant's legal fees under state law for filing a frivolous claim." The gavel fell with a sound that felt like thunder, final and cleansing. My mother's lips parted in disbelief. Father's shoulders slumped, the fight draining from him. For just an instant, I thought I saw relief in his eyes, as if losing was the only way he could be free of her obsession. They gathered their papers quickly and left through the side door without looking back. I didn't move. I couldn't. Amelia's hand found mine, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your grandfather would be proud." Pride wasn't what I felt. What filled me was peace, quiet, fragile, and real. I wasn't triumphant, I was whole. As the courtroom emptied, I walked to the window, watching sunlight spill across the old courthouse garden. The hibiscus glowed crimson against the white stone, alive, defiant, blooming as if to say, "You survived again." For 30 years, I'd wondered what justice truly meant, and now I knew. Justice wasn't revenge, it wasn't victory. It was truth, restored, steady, and still standing after every storm. A year has passed since that verdict, and still some mornings, I wake before dawn to the sound of rain against the windows, the same rhythm that once echoed through my grandparents' home. The world is quieter now, softer. I kept the promise I made that day in court. I didn't let bitterness take root. Instead, I chose to build what my grandparents taught me, a life grounded in truth and kindness. Their house has become my own, filled with the same smell of lemon poppy seed cake on Sundays, the same garden of crimson hibiscus that never stops blooming. Sometimes, when I pass the mirror on my way out, I catch a glimpse of my reflection and see a little of each of them in me. Grandfather's steadiness, grandmother's grace. And I finally understand. Family isn't defined by blood, it's defined by who shows up when life gets hard. The scars of betrayal don't disappear, but they stop hurting when you fill your life with people who stay, friends, mentors, even strangers who become the home you were denied. That's the quiet victory no courtroom can award. So if you've ever been left behind or had to rebuild yourself from what others abandoned, this story is for you. Leave a comment and tell me what family means to you. I read every word. And if stories like this touch your heart, like this video and subscribe. Not for the numbers, but because somewhere out there, someone needs to be reminded. You are not alone. You are the proof that love chosen is stronger than love inherited. And like those hibiscus in the garden, no matter the storm, you can bloom again.